Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. Thomas Miller along with Robert Glasscock. We are going to, if you will afford us the opportunity, take one more swing at this horary situation that we talked about in the last two episodes. Part 2 was the I'm going to Florida. This is part 3, the aftermath of going to Florida. What happened? And I'm sure that you'd like to know, and we'd like to tell you, as good old Paul Harvey said, the rest of the story. Well, here's the deal. One of the things Robert said when we cast this horary chart, and by the way, the chart is in the show notes, and if you have not heard those last two episodes, you're joining us on this one, it's really a sequel. I would encourage you to listen to the first part and then the second part. The first part was we were just answering a question from a listener about did I pass the bar exam, and it led to this. And this is an incredible example of horary astrology. So the chart said that I should go to Florida. It said emphatically go now because it was a 0-degree answer to the question. And one of the subtleties that we talked about in that last episode, but we didn't know the extent of, was Pluto sitting in the second house. Please look at the chart in the notes. Pluto is sitting in the second house in a T-square, and one of the squares is up to the sun, which was the immediate outcome of the question. That's the Leo side, and we'll reassemble this in this episode as we talk through it. But you know, Robert, one of the things that came up was that Cheryl's affairs, her financial affairs, were not completely in order. And I don't want to get too personal here. So one of the things of that 0-degree go now was the encouragement, and I can't do anything other than just encourage her, and that's what I did, to please get your affairs in order.
You know, one of the reasons I was so glad that you brought this question up, Thomas, is this is horary astrology in real life. And which reminds me that this 9-week horary course that you and I have is exactly the same 9-week course that I taught off and on for Kepler College for the past 15 years. I would do it once every, 3, 4, 5 years. It's based on Mark Edmund Jones's book, which still, apparently the book is now out of print, so it's very difficult to find a copy of it. But that book is the only horary book I have ever read, including William Lilly and Ivy Jacobson Goldstein and Charles Carter and on, that goes into the underlying theory of space and time and why and how horary astrology works. William Lilly is basically you have to memorize reams of kind of arbitrary information. And the same with the other books. This rules that, that rules this, but they don't tell you why you have to use these horizon lines between the house that rules the question and its opposite house, the rulers of those things. In other words, the underlying theory behind horary astrology and why it works. So when you and I got into this question, it was immediate because we both identified it in the 3rd, 9th axis. So you take the ruler of the 9th and the ruler of the 3rd for the trip, and it's the Sun and Saturn, which form a trine. The answer is yes, go. And you could stop there. But as you look, and I both know, I like to maximize, make something out of everything you see, if you can. And this is why the first thing I really said to you was that she is a dying woman because of the moon, Saturn, moon, women, Saturn, Pisces, loss, sorrow, and so on. And then we looked at this T-square in this chart from Pluto in the second house of money. It's not your money, it's hers. And Pluto it's across the line of sign. Pluto's in late Capricorn, and the sun in your house of friends, this woman friend, as it's 0 Scorpio. So they're square. And they're also in a square, T-square, with the nodes, which is karmic. So when you discovered that her finances have not been in order, she's not taken care of any of this. Fortunately, she had this wonderful friend whom you met down there. And you and she, another friend, 11th house here, were able to talk with each other about the need for Cheryl to get her affairs in order. And in fact, you had the paperwork to do this. So all of these elements combine to show you how effective this horoscope really is. And of course, Scorpio is very much involved here, other people's money, estates. So I'm loving the outcome of all this because it was emotionally moving, you say touched, for both you and Cheryl. And as I mentioned to you, I'm not sure we did this in the podcast, but privately, I had said your own metaphysical and spiritual energies, healing abilities, and your Scorpio too, would resonate with her. And there is not a thing in the world wrong, quote unquote, wrong with dying or death. We all are going to do it. And death sometimes, in fact, more often than not, will show up in trines and sextiles in astrology, as here, just as much as in squares and oppositions. Everybody thinks of death as something negative, but it isn't, unless your belief system takes you there. It's natural. And so I knew that your presence there would be healing in that way. It's not going to cure her cancer, but it makes the process that she's going through much more deep and healing and peaceful than it would have been otherwise. And it's also good for you. So that was the main thing I wanted to communicate, I guess, with the listeners, is how practical horary astrology can be in a situation like this, which is pretty difficult. But nonetheless, it's very clear and helps anybody who's using astrology to understand what exactly is going on.
There's a piece of this that you covered very well that I'm thinking two things that we could look at here for further interpretation. One is this desire to treat it naturally. Uranus is on the cusp of the sixth house. Does that show this unusualness about the treatment of the...
The sixth house in this chart is your health. You're the querent. You see what I mean? You're identified at the first house in this chart. You're the one that asked the question about a trip. Guess what's rising? Sagittarius. And the opposite sign, Gemini, is setting. That establishes the horizon line for you. So Uranus is in your sixth house of health, and Uranus is, of course, one of the other things it rules is astrology. And in your sixth house of what I like to call the sixth house of psychological self-integration, you're an astrologer, and you bring astrology and metaphysics to bear not only on your health, but just your mentality and your psychology and how you put your life together. That's Uranus in the sixth house. Your friend's health is ruled by what house?
Actually, this is a good point I'd like you to elaborate on, because the question itself was a third house, ninth house question. My health, you're saying, as the astrologer, is the sixth house, but we're talking about Cheryl's health. So where do we find Cheryl?
You just asked, your original question was, should I take this trip? And that's a third, ninth house in relation to you, shown at the first house as being the querent who asked the question. Now you just ask about her health, and because she had resisted conventional medical treatment, in fact did for 19 years. But you're asking about your friend's health. Your friend is shown in the 11th house. She's
Back
not
up
a
there
spouse.
where the sun is. Yeah. Okay.
Where all those, So her health is ruled by the 6th from the 11th, which is your 4th house in the what we call the crisis chart, this original chart. So Cheryl's health is shown by Neptune in Pisces, and it is in conjunct the node, the south node in her house. And frankly, in conjunct her sun as well. Now, they're in harmonious signs, which I like, if she is in fact dying. These are both water signs. Neptune is in late degrees Pisces. The sun is at 0 degrees Aries. Well, they're only 5 degrees apart, and the actual aspect is an in conjunct, 150 degrees, but it's across the line of sign, because they're both in harmonious water signs. But there's her health, and Neptune in Pisces shows her health is dissolving or slowly waning, slowly going away. With Neptune, that's symbolic of a wasting disease. The old books will call that a wasting disease. It's retrograde Neptune, so it's been with her for some time, a long time, 19 years. But what it also shows, that sixth house, I call that house the house of psychological self-integration, which it is, because your psychology and your physical health and your spiritual health are all tied in together. They're all ruled by that sixth house. And in this case, you're visiting her, in effect, stimulates her spiritual, metaphysical, Neptunian side. These are qualities that you brought into this equation. This is really why you were there. And so it helps her, and this is all unconscious. You don't have to do any rituals. You don't even have to tell her. But your presence there comes from a place of very deep compassion and acceptance of what's going on. And that alone helps ease her. You're bringing peace.
All right, you say now make something out of everything you see. So we just identified the fourth house here of the chart as the sixth house of her health. And you mentioned, okay, Pisces, the last sign, the 12th house.
True.
Ending, completing, Neptune in the last degrees of it, as you said. So there's the reality. And that's the thing that she is not accepting, is the reality that this is the end. And that's Neptune, which also is, on the flip side, illusion, delusion. And she was under, I remember when she told me the cancer had recurred. Cheryl, please go get that cut out of your body now. And it was small enough that they could have. Nope, not going to do it. Neptune, boom.
And Thomas, all of us really metaphysically, the truth is, unconsciously, we know when we are going to die. And this can happen more than once in life. We can come up against a crisis. It can be the breakup of a relationship that so depresses us that we think, why should I go on? So at different points in life, we may unconsciously consider dying, though we don't talk about it necessarily, but other people actually do. They'll take their own lives. But that can happen more than once in life. So when you're predicting death, for example, in a birth horoscope, you may see several different ages where death could happen. And then if you're under death aspects, they can mean a whole different thing if you're in combat in Afghanistan, let's say, or if you're sitting at home in Southern California, perfectly healthy and happy, then it's unlikely to happen. So depending on the person's circumstances here, she refused treatment because of her own belief systems. And that was a choice that her soul made, and many people do. I don't want to go to doctors. I don't believe in them. I'm going to do this naturally. Fine. And in fact, it has worked for her for 19 years.
It's a good run.
But yeah.
It's a very good run.
But in the face of this increasingly obvious, now this cancer, as you've explained to me privately, is something that cannot be operated on. And yet she still hasn't, until you got there and Sylvia she still has not faced being responsible for her estate. So she's still avoiding, and this is very Neptunian, it's very escapist. She's avoiding taking care of her affairs, just as she avoided taking care of the cancer, medically anyway. But you can see consistently here, she is a woman who can be very stubborn and who also is avoiding responsibility for her own affairs.
Didn't you tell me that Pisces can be a stubborn sign?
Yes, sir.
Where does that come from?
I think it comes from an overreaction to the sensitivity and the I don't know quite the word. Pisces, is a double sign, so they're always of two sides about everything. Never forget, Einstein was a Pisces. Everybody thinks it's a confused sign and wishy-washy and all of that. Einstein was a Pisces. It can be incredibly brilliant.
So is
But
Tony
it's got,
Robbins. I mean, you look at him.
okay, but it's got this dual sign to it, so dual side to it. So everything in its life, part of it, if it takes action, then part of it's worried about taking the action. If it doesn't take, so it's constantly second guessing itself in a way, and it can be very evasive and very secretive and very destructive if it's now this is not her birth chart, and I'm not saying she is destructive, but this is one of the configurations of things like alcoholism and drug addiction and crime is the only reason people commit crimes is because they don't think they can get what they want legitimately through hard work, education, and training. They can't get it legitimately, or they refuse to get it legitimately, so they're going to go about it with an underhanded means and try and cheat their way to what they want. And this is why the old adage, crime doesn't pay. It's almost karmic. If you've gotten something that in your heart you didn't deserve because you didn't earn it legitimately, that will eat away at you. And you can see it today in public figures. Fascinating sign.
You're talking 12th house stuff there. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. All right, you make something out of everything you see. I'd like to leave with one more thing. If you look at this chart, you'll see that Virgo is ruling the 10th house and that Venus is just a few degrees off the cusp in the 9th house. And that little A-looking thing there is Urania. It's an asteroid like Chiron. And a lot of people now in astrology, including old Robert Hand, has picked up on this, is that it's an indication of where astrology might show up in your life. And I'm just looking at this in closing here as that Venus, the love planet, and Virgo, the health, and astrology saying to go, that I took a little detour out of my life for several days and a couple of thousand miles, not that much, but a few hundred miles for sure, to go show some love to a friend with no payback, no return, just a gift, an outward flow, and to help her with this decision with her health. And it was all governed by the advice of astrology to say go. And one thing I've decided for myself with Horary is if I'm going to ask the chart, and if it says yes, I'm going to do what it says. If it says no, I'm going to do what it says, even if I might personally have another choice. I'm not going to take it to the chart and not do what it says.
I had a businessman client from Japan many years ago, hugely successful. He told me when we first met, he said, I have never let astrology stop me from doing something I want to do in business. What I have done is let astrology delay my doing it until the time is ripe.
Very amazing situation. Thank you for your advice, my friend. I appreciate it.
Well, I owe it all to Mark Edmund Jones, Horary Astrology.
So we do have this course, and you put it together with some updates. I know you brushed some things up and brought it more to now. And obviously, this is a time-aged technique, so it's like something that's going to be around, has been around for a long time, will be around for a long time. But the thing about the course is you learn so much more than just horary. But you can see the example of how this could be so prolific in your life that all of a sudden you're faced with this in the moment. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to Robert on a podcast, and I was getting ready to go in a different direction in the van, and all of a sudden this spun it around, and look at the ripple effect of this, all from casting a horary chart. And what the purpose of that course is to teach you to fish, not to give you a fish.
True. And also, one of the great things about Mark Edmund Jones, which is what all of this course is based on, is you do learn when, in fact, in his book, he has a chapter, when to revert to natal techniques. So the two systems, horary astrology and natal astrology, absolutely can cross over. And I hope in this course, he makes it clear when you can do that. His big maxim really is never go beyond answering the question. So technically, you and I should not have gone any further than saying, absolutely, take this trip. Next question. But again, Mark Edmund Jones helps show you that in certain situations, you not only can, but should explore the chart a little further, always bearing in mind the original question. So everything has to relate to that original question. But that's, in fact, exactly everything else we talked about: the money, the brother, the estate, all of that. This is why I love this course so much. And as I say, I've done this, I don't know, 3 or 5 times in 15 years for Kepler College, and it always has a good response, especially now that I have learned that Mark Edmund Jones's book is no longer available.
Yeah, it's hard to get, and it's way overpriced if you do find it. One of the things about learning horary is, and what the course does, is it teaches you this whole system. But then you have to apply it. And even our listener, Allison, who asked the initial question that got all this started about her, whether or not she passed the bar, obviously there were loose ends in there that would, in the course, if she had gone through the course, it would have probably tied up those loose ends. And I know, look, if you're preparing for the bar, you are not studying horary astrology. I totally get that. And maybe sometime in her successful career as an attorney, she'll be able to do that. But there were a series of practicums going on basically to be able to figure all this out in your head, because it does take a lot to screw it all together. And we tried to cover every base there in that course to be able to do that.
Well, after the course itself, the students had suggested that with Kepler, could we have some practicums and bring our own horary questions? So Kepler set it up at 5 weeks at a time, so people couldn't just pop in and out every week. So they would pay for 5 weeks, and they would bring their own questions, and we would analyze them as a group. And in fact, I'm not sure, but I think that's where you and I met, Thomas, originally.
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And those went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. So it was great fun because every question was different from finding. I remember one question we had, a woman, she was getting divorced, and she had hidden the title to her car because she didn't want her soon-to-be ex-husband to find it. And she couldn't remember where she had hidden it. And she brought that question to class, and basically I asked her, do you have a home office? Is it on the north side of your house? Yes and yes. Do you have some books in that home office? Do you have a cookbook in that home office? Look in that cookbook and see if you slipped it in between some pages in a cookbook. And by God, she came back the next week, and that's where it was. So even on something as seemingly trivial, it wasn't to her, it was a title to a car, but something that specific, horary astrology can be of incredible guidance.
I hadn't heard that before. That is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we did this, because you can learn that too. All right.
And the thing about that, Thomas, it was done in front of other people. One of my gripes about all the old books, Ivy Jacobson, Goldstein, all of these old books, Charles Carter, even William Lilly, they're talking about, I remember, I don't know who it was, talking about this man died in a bicycle accident in the Alps. They make it sound like they predicted that in advance, but they didn't. What they're doing is showing you in this horary chart where that shows up, and anybody can do that. And this is true for a lot of astrology books. They make it, Ivy Jacobson Goldstein was wonderful. I love her books. But under no circumstances do you find anywhere where she actually predicted this in advance. And that's the test. So I love doing this in groups because you either get it right or you don't. And if you don't, you learn something from that too. But when you get it right, it reinforces these techniques. So
yeah,
those were great fun. Anyway, I've loved this question. I'm so glad it was brought to it, that you brought it to us.
And all the way back to Allison, who got this started with her question about did she pass the bar. We thank you too, Allison. See, the ripple effect of putting something out there can be this far. If you'd like to get some information on the course, it's in the show notes. There's a direct link there, and it will take you to the information page. We'd love to have you join it. It really is, in your astrological practice. Whenever the time is right for you to take it on, It is a great learning tool. I will also mention it is more of an intermediate to advanced study. If you don't feel that you're ready for that, we have the Fun Astrology 101 course that will get you ready for it. If you've done the 101 course and it makes sense, Horary will also be able to make sense. And we have a full Discord channel to help support this, and Kristen Lawhead runs that. Robert and I can pop in with questions as well, so you'll get full support to make sure that you get the course. To understand it. We want you to, and our commitment is to that as well. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for letting us share this. It was special to me for sure. We'll be back with the next in the series of Saturn and Pisces on the next Old Soul, New Soul Astrology podcast episode. We'll see you then.